Hello.
Hi,
How are you today?
I am just doing very well, thank you. I'm
This
so
is
happy
one
to
of
be
the
here.
best reunions that I'll have in my lifetime. I've done a few things, but this is one of the best.
You are so sweet.
Thank you. And I want to introduce you quickly to the audience because I don't want to take a lot of time because people know you. But I want to give you time to talk more about your journey. And that's what this show is about,
Okay.
the journey, because we all have one.
Oh, yes.
Good, bad, or indifferent,
Indifferent.
but we make the most of it, and that's why you're here. Your journey is not all what it appears to be. How did you get here? What happened along the way? So, to the audience, the viewing audience, the listening audience, I want you to know that I have one of my favorite people in this world, Miss Bea Hines. And Bea, I'm going to give it over to you. Talk to us about your journey.
Well, I guess I have to start with when I was born.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
I was born in Williston, Florida on February 12th, 1938.
So beautiful.
I am 83 years old. And I'm loving every minute of my age. I'm just so curious, and it's so wonderful. Every day I'm discovering new stuff about aging, and some of it
Yes.
isn't so pretty.
But as we
but
said,
most of it
yes.
is just amazing,
Yes.
and it's wonderful. And so, as I said, I was born in Williston. My mother was in an abusive marriage,
Okay.
and I have a younger brother, Adam, and one day she decided that she would not subject her children to that kind of environment any longer. And I remember I was 5 years old when we left Williston.
Wow.
And I remember the morning very well because I used to get up. My dad was abusive to her, but he was never abusive to us.
Wow. Wow. That's
And so
interesting.
it is interesting.
Yes.
And I would get up every morning with him. My brother would be asleep, and I would sit on his lap and drink coffee from the saucer at breakfast. And this particular morning was no different. My mother had washed the whole week and ironed all of his clothes, and they were hanging neatly in the closet. And she made his lunch that morning and kissed him at the door.
Okay.
And when she saw that truck take off, I turned the corner, she swirled around. I can see her right now, swirling around from that door. And Mother Bell, who we call Ma Dear,
Yes. Yes.
came from next door because they had plotted her getaway.
I want you to continue, but I
Yes.
want those who will see this get that lesson. She kissed him.
Yes, she did.
She
He
made
never
his
knew.
breakfast. She made his lunch.
That's
Everything
right.
seemed
House was
normal.
clean.
House was clean. Ironed his clothes. Okay, I hope there are those
Yeah.
who
Oh
are
my
in
goodness.
abusive situations.
Strong black woman.
Yes, that's
they
the
got
word.
together in that rural Williston, Florida,
Yes,
and my
yes.
dear, she had a daughter named Minnie.
Okay.
And she was married to my dad's brother, Minnie was.
Okay.
And she was abusive. He was abusive to her. So they followed us to Miami later on, years later.
Okay.
And my dear used to keep my children. She was a babysitter for me, and when she came to Miami, she was a babysitter for my children.
Look at that connection.
Yes, that connection goes. I mean, it's a strong connection.
Strong.
But it was they had made plans with the man who drove the lumber truck.
Okay.
And my mother, as she washed and ironed clothes for my dad and took care of his stuff, she was packing the big steam trunk, the big old trunks, you know.
Yes, I
She
do.
was packing our stuff.
Okay.
And he never missed anything. So that morning when he left and Ma Dear came over and she took care of my hair and combed my hair and put a bow on
Yes.
it and
you
dressed me.
You had before you got this beautiful cut. Such beautiful
It was
hair.
thick.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going.
This was a
Wonderful.
necessary thing,
I
a
know.
necessary evil.
I know. I know.
But anyway, she put a big bow on my hair, and the truck came by right on time.
Okay.
And I remember he took that big trunk and threw it up on those logs and fastened it to the logs so it wouldn't fall off. And he lifted me up and put me in the
Yes.
cab of the truck. And then he helped my dear held my brother while he helped my mother.
Yes.
And we were off.
Yes.
And our first stop was to my aunt, my mother's sister, in Palatka, Florida. And my Aunt Thelma was the sweetest. She and her husband were so sweet to us. They had 5 children of their own. And they took care of us like we were their own children. And I was telling my great-grandson the story about the 2 pennies, my birthday gift when I was 6 years old, because I was 5 when we left, but I made my 6th birthday with Aunt Thelma and
Yes.
Uncle Morgan. And they were poor.
Yes.
And I remember going to a one-room schoolhouse the few months that we were there. But Auntie Thelma said to me, I didn't even know it was my birthday. She knew it was my birthday. And she said, Auntie doesn't have a gift for you, but take these 2 pennies
Oh my.
and go and buy yourself
That
something
sounds
from the
like a
store.
book.
Oh my goodness, it was so beautiful.
Take these 2 pennies.
I have written 2 columns about that.
Oh my.
I will never
We have
forget.
to do that research.
Yeah,
I like that.
I have never forgotten that. And we lived in rural Palatka, and there was a country store that we had to take a path through the woods. And she had 4 boys, and a girl, and my brother and I, we made 7. And so Bernice and I were just a year apart, and she was so pretty, and we skipped through the woods with the 2 pennies, because I love chocolate snaps, and you could get a box like this of chocolate snaps for 2 pennies back then.
Okay.
So when we were so tired when we got on the porch, and I jumped up on the porch and there were 2 old men sitting there. I never forget this. It was such a beautiful scene. And I said, oh, Bernice, I'm so tired, my heart is beating. And the old man said, well, young lady, I'm glad your heart is beating, because if it wasn't beating, you'd be dead.
How about that?
And, you know, there's some stories that you never forget.
And I don't want you to forget them, because I want us to travel through this journey.
Yes.
A lot of it I know.
I know.
But a lot of it I don't, because
Right.
the 2 pennies,
You
that
didn't
is
know.
so interesting. We're going to look that up.
It was my best birthday gift ever. I don't care what anybody gives me for a birthday. Those 2 pennies meant so much to me, because she didn't have anything.
Okay.
And she gave me what she had.
And that's what it's all about.
And that's what it was,
What it's
mostly
all about.
love.
Yes.
So Bernice and I walked very slowly through the woods, eating the cookies, because we would have to share them with all those boys back home.
Yes.
So we left a few in the box,
Okay.
but we ate most of them
Okay.
on the way home.
So you're in Miami now.
So now we left. My mother came after Easter and picked us up, and it was in April when we arrived in Miami,
remember
Florida.
it all.
Yeah, and it was 1944. And we moved, she had found, it is the 9th Street corridor now in Overtown. Okay. But our house, the house we lived in, faced First Court. And I remember the address. It was 135 Northwest 9th Street.
Look at that.
And it was a 3-story house. It was the home of a brother and a sister, the Watkins. And I understand from the story that I heard, they were mulattoes. Their father was white. And he had left that property. It was a beautiful property. There was a tennis court on the property. They had servants' houses in the back.
Okay.
And so they rented those houses out. And we lived on the 3rd floor in one big bedroom that my mother rented.
Yes.
And the next door was the bathroom. And we were so happy. And my mother worked, at that time, she had a job at Southern Furniture Company, which was right on the corner of 9th Street and 2nd Avenue. And she could look out the window to check on us during the summer. Because she couldn't afford a babysitter.
Right.
But all the mothers took care of us.
That was the way it was.
All the mothers.
Yes.
Doris Dorset became her best friend. Doris's children, her daughter, her oldest daughter is 87. We are still friends. Wow. We are still friends. And Floyd and I talk almost every other day. He lives in New York.
Okay.
He is my age.
Okay.
Yeah, we were classmates. So those connections with those women who loved my mother, and Doris's mother, Mrs. Rogers, took to my mother, and she was her daughter. She was another daughter.
And that's how it goes.
And that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes.
And that's what made me, that helped to shape my life. There was a woman who I had come back home. She had a little store. There was an empty lot next to the big house where we lived, and a path that led from 10th Street, where Miss Rogers lived, who was my friend's grandmother.
Right.
And you could hear her coming through the path saying, "Nellie," that was her granddaughter, "Nellie." And on the other side of the path was a house, and in the front the woman had a little store. and she sold cookies and milk and bread and stuff like that. And she'd come back home from, I understand, from up north, as we used to call it.
Yes,
And
yes.
she took a liking to me, and she used to tell me I was such a sweet girl, and when I'm well, we're gonna go to Odell's for dinner, you and I.
Okay.
And you know, well, Ed Odell's dad
Yes.
had a
That's
beautiful
another story.
had a beautiful restaurant,
Yes.
and because we lived in a rooming house on holidays, my mother would dress us up, and we would go to Odell's to eat. That was where
Wow,
we
look at
had our
that.
dinner. Yeah, and
Look at that.
the waitresses were beautifully groomed. There were linen tablecloths and carpeting on the floor,
Classy.
and beautiful handkerchiefs
Yes, I
from their
remember.
uniforms,
Yes,
you
I
know,
remember
and
seeing
they
that.
treated us like royalty.
And you were. So I want you to move on to the story that I probably know as well as you do, how you got to be at the Miami Herald. But I want the audience to get the front story because
Okay.
you just didn't land.
No, I
Okay.
didn't. So I always wanted to attend Booker T. Washington High School.
We'll forgive.
Forgive me, please, Miss Bull. But because we lived in Overtown, and I
Right.
went to Douglas, which was
Yes,
right down the
right
street
down
from
the
Booker
street.
T. And all those big girls and boys would be walking past, and I would fall in line with them because I wanted people to think I was coming from Booker T. Also, I was in the third grade.
Goodness. How about that?
So, but anyway, we moved away. My mother remarried a
Okay.
fine man named James Stevenson. I think he's passed now, but the marriage only lasted for about 4 years. He dearly loved my mother, but my mother by that time was so independent.
Okay.
You know, she was like being her independent self.
Yes, yes.
And so the marriage didn't really. He took us to Texas when I was 10.
Okay.
Bought my mother a nice house in
Wonderful.
1913 Wiseman Street. And then, but the weather out there, the tornado hit that
Yes.
spring and the floods, and she said, I'd rather fight the hurricanes in Miami.
Because you can almost tell when they're coming.
So they put the house up for sale, and we moved back to Miami.
Okay.
And for a while, we lived in Liberty City, and I went to Liberty City Elementary. The new school was just built
Yeah.
on 71st Street, was it?
71st.
And I was in the 6th grade with Thurley Smith, was the president of the student council, and I was the vice president.
Okay.
So then when I got into 7th grade, I was so worried that my mother would not let me go take the bus to
Booker T.
Overtown, but she knew that it was my desire from a little girl, and so she did. We used to buy a bus card for 80 cents. That would take us for the whole week. They would punch it on, the driver would punch it, and that took us there. So while I was at Booker T, I had an interest in the arts. But my mother didn't understand my desire for writing and singing and drawing. I was a very good artist. And I had a scholarship in voice to Knoxville College, which she didn't let me take. She thought that if I didn't become a teacher or a nurse, I wouldn't be able to get a job as a black woman. And she did not want me to be disappointed. And so she said, well, you won't go to school now. I had my luggage, I had sent my room and board fee and everything. I was ready to go.
Ready to go.
So she said, well, why don't we work a year and then you go? Because she was afraid the scholarship wouldn't help. She didn't understand
I know.
how it went,
know.
you know. And I couldn't hold it against her because she didn't understand, and I know that she didn't. She took some bad advice from somebody else whose child didn't get a scholarship.
Oh, my.
Okay.
Okay.
But that's another story too. But anyway, then the next year though, I decided to get married.
Okay.
I married a guy I'd had a crush on since I was 9 years old. He didn't even know I existed back then, but I knew he existed.
Yes.
And he was 3 years ahead of me in school, and he had just come out of the service. He had had a year in college and gone to the service, and then he'd come home, and we got together, and he wanted to marry me like 3 months into the relationship, but I was worried about what my mother would say, and so I said, well, can't we just wait a while? But anyway, by July, we got married.
Okay.
I didn't go back to school until I was a young widow. He died he got killed, as a matter of fact, when I was 24 and he was 27.
Okay.
He was a young cop, and he was off duty when he was killed. Very handsome young man, and I didn't know I didn't know this role. This was a new role for me. Widow, what is that?
What is that?
But I knew I had these two little boys,
Yes.
and I had to do something to take care of them. And so I was a maid at the time. I worked
Say
for a
that
family.
again.
I was a maid, a domestic worker
Right.
at the time, and I was good at what I did. My mother used to say, whatever you do, make it, do the best, be the best at whatever you do. And so I had all her friends wanting me to come to work for them.
Okay.
You know, because I was good.
You were good.
I was good at what I did. And so, but one year, I had only been working for 3 years as a maid before I went to the Miami Herald. But the year before I left, her family went to Europe, and she left with me without any. She didn't say, "Well, I'm going to pay you to come in and check on the house or anything." She just left me empty like that, and I was so hurt because I was very loyal to her. And so I decided, okay, when she comes back, I'm going to have me another job. But it doesn't always work that way.
I know.
Especially if you're a Christian and you know that God says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and you don't try to take revenge.
Yes.
So I didn't get another job. But when she came back, I asked her if I could have Wednesdays off and work Saturdays. And she was glad about that because that meant she had a clean house for the weekend. And so what I did on those Wednesdays was I went looking for a job. And she did not know.
Okay.
So every Sunday I would circle, and then at that time, the ads had to say, we are an equal opportunity employer because of President Johnson's and the act that was passed, okay? And so I would circle all the ads that I thought I was eligible, for. And some of them were like bank tellers and clerks and that kind of stuff. And I remember calling this one bank, and I said, they wanted to know, I said, well, do you have to have a college degree? And they said, no, but you need a high school diploma. I said, well, I have that.
I have that.
And they said, well, where? And at that time, I had also had like 2 years of business school. They had a local business school downtown that I went to.
Okay.
And so she said, well, what high school did you graduate from? And I said proudly, Booker T. Washington High School.
Okay.
And at that time, it was an all-black school.
Yes.
And she knew that. And she said, oh, well, let me get my manager and let him talk to you. And he came to the phone so fast, and he said, as of right now, that job has been taken. And I said, thank you. And I knew he was lying.
Opening doors.
Oh, yes.
Opening doors.
So the next ad that I saw was from the Miami Herald. And they didn't have a phone number. They had a post office box, which meant that I had to write a letter of application. They wanted to know if I could spell, if I could write, and that's okay, because I was going to be a clerk. I could do that.
You could do that.
Thanks to Jane Lewis, the late, great Jane Lewis, who was my 8th grade business teacher at Booker T. Washington High School, who taught me how to, by the time I was a senior, I could fill out my income tax, I could write a letter of application, I knew what a resume was, and all of that thing. So what I did was I took a piece of paper, lined paper, because I didn't have a typewriter, and I put a plain sheet over so that my lines would be straight. I have a nice handwriting. And I took my time and I wrote a letter of application. And then they didn't ask for a resume, but I thought I would give them one.
Oh, my.
So
Look at you.
It didn't say very much, but they knew I knew what a resume was. So, and to my surprise, when they got that letter, the same day they got that letter at the Miami Herald, they called me and wanted to know if I could come down on my next day off for an in-person interview. And I said yes. And on that next Wednesday, I got dressed and I went into the Miami Herald, and they kept me all day.
Okay.
Not only did they interview me, they tested me from Miami to Kingdom Come.
I know about those tests.
Yes. And I left there around 4:30, and then the next day, a man named Mr. Sykes, who was my supervisor at the library, called me and said, well, Miss Hines, you have the job.
Oh, my.
And this was in December, just before Christmas. And I said, well, could I start in January? They wanted me to start like that next Monday.
Look at that.
And I said, I would like to give the people that I work for a notice, and which is more than
How
they would have
honorable
done would
of
do for
you.
me. But I just wanted to do that. And so
Absolutely.
they said, well, okay, well, you'll start the first Monday in January, which was in 1966. So when I went into work the next day, I called the lady that I worked for, and I said, I would like to talk to you. And she thought I was going to ask for a raise. And she was all ready to tell me no. And I said, I just want you to know I'm giving you a 2 weeks notice. I have another job. And she sat down in the nearest chair, and I believe she was crying because she did not expect that. And then she said, well, how much are you going to make? And I was only making $60 a week, you know. But when they told me on the phone that I was going to be making $60 a week, I turned to my mother and I said, Mom, well, the job pays $60 a week, and Sean was 5.
Oh.
And he was standing there, and he said, oh, Mommy, we're rich, we're rich.
All the money in the world. Well, let me tell you this. We could go on and on and on and on. Why? Because I want our children, all children, to see Miss Bea Hines from the Miami Herald and know how you got there. I am full. My eyes are full because I know that you never gave up.
No, I couldn't.
Which meant that the little girl, 2 little girls
Oh, yeah.
from Liberty
From
City.
Liberty City.
We have to let them know this is it. This is what we call life.
That's right.
We do not bow down.
Nope.
We do not fall down. We are persistent. We insist on everyone knowing it's not your zip code
That's right.
that determines where you're going to go.
That's
So
right.
Bea Hines, it's my honor. And don't think that I won't have you back.
Oh, my
because
goodness.
there's so much more to tell.
To be continued.
To be continued. God bless you. Love you. See you on the journey.
Thank you so much. I love you back.
Thank you.